Hello and welcome to IGPP Expert Talks. I am Heena Goswami, Editorial Consultant with IGPP, Institute for Governance, Policies and Politics, New Delhi. At IGPP Expert Talks, today we discuss a topic that brings together two of my own passions, technology and politics. And to discuss the same, we are joined by Mr. Rudy van Belkom. Mr. Rudy van Belkom is the Executive Director of the Netherlands Study Center for Technology Trends, and he speaks and writes about the influence of technology on our society. According to him, the question is not what future we will get, but what future we want. He is currently conducting research on behalf of Study Center for Technology Trends into the impact of technology on the future of democracy. For the past parliamentary elections, he developed Technologie Kieswijzer, an innovative election compass on tech-related topics such as privacy, fake news, and the power of big tech. Welcome to IGPP Expert Talk, sir.
Thank you.
So the year 2024 was one of the biggest election years in history with over 60 countries going to polls. However, the year also saw a new and powerful player, AI, artificial intelligence. From micro-targeting voters to engaging them in regional languages, AI has transformed election strategies while also introducing new challenges like deepfakes, misinformation, and deceptive content, such as robocalls impersonating leaders. Do you believe AI is reshaping the electoral landscape, and if so, in what ways?
Well, yes, I would say obviously, because like you stated in the introduction, we have disinformation, we have deep fakes, we have micro-targeting, etc. So obviously the landscape is changing because I believe when we look at especially when we look at the voting process, it's about information. So as a citizen, it's about how you get your information, how do you receive information. For political parties, it's about how do you send out the information, how do you create information, and it's a dialogue now. So that's a big change when it was just about radio or just pamphlets or etc. So the way we use information has changed a lot. I mean, in the early days, we just looked into some party programs, and then we looked at the news, and maybe there was a debate on television. But now politicians are really close because in the early days there was a gap between politicians and citizens, and you couldn't really talk to them or address them or connect with them or interact with them. But now it's like hyper nearby. I mean, when you go to X or you go to Facebook or you go to other platforms, you can just ask a question, you can just react, you can just say, I disagree. And people, in my opinion, have become a little overconfident. I mean, back in the days, you had a little bit more respect and for these kinds of institutions. So, for example, when you go to a doctor, the doctor told you what the problem is and how you get better. But nowadays, people go online and they search for all the different things, and they go to the doctor, well informed or misinformed. And when the doctor gives you an advice, a lot of people are like, no, 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 no. That's not the case, doctor. It's completely different. So I mean, that makes it pretty complicated to have this more traditional relationship between politicians and voters. I remember an incident in the Netherlands where I work, and there were different kind of riots concerning the COVID situation. And there was a politician who walked on the street just going to his work or something. And this lady came nearby and she was just harassing him, like, what's this and what's that and why is this? And later on, they tracked down this lady, they traced that lady, and they asked, did you think that was normal behavior? Like, you just attack a politician on the street? I mean, do you think that's normal? And she said, I didn't attack him. I just want to be heard. And then I was like, wow. So if in the Netherlands we have like 18 million people now, and let's say 11 or 12 million people can vote, that would mean that all those millions of people can just address politicians and expect to be heard. I mean, that's kind of crazy. And now that's just with the internet and social media. But now with AI, you can create all these other types of content. So for citizens, I think they are a bit overly informed sometimes, and maybe sometimes misinformed, and they base their conclusions on misinformation. And that's kind of a different, well, dangerous situation almost, because what we miss is the shared reality. Like before, you have had a discussion about the solution of a problem, and you can disagree. That's all good, and that's why there are multiple parties in the Netherlands, so you can choose and vote. But now people are disagreeing about the problem itself. So if you are like, there's no climate change, how can you work towards a solution? Or if you would say COVID is a hoax, how can you work towards a solution and stay healthy? I mean, that's really difficult. And I do believe that this new landscape of information technology, especially with AI, has made this a lot more complicated to be a society in a way.
Elections have always evolved alongside technology, whether it was pamphlets during the French Revolutions or newspaper, and then radio, TV, social media, and now AI, right? Is it only misinformation or over-information that defines the shift, or what more it is to this shift? What makes the shift to AI, and especially generative AI, different from past innovations in political campaigning?
Well, the first shift that we just discussed, I think people are informed in different ways. There's a lot of misinformation, and people still think they are right. So I think that leads to a lot of polarization, and it's just difficult to agree on topics. But with generative AI, there's a new component, because we can not only create information, but also other types of content like video or photo, etc. And it's, well, pretty darn easy to create a leader of a state and make him say or do things that just aren't real. And I think one shift is information, but the other shift is trust. So I think we have a decline in trust in political institutions, but also broader in democratic institutions. And in my opinion, there are a lot of political parties nowadays that know this. So there is some kind of trust crisis, but instead of finding a solution for this crisis, they throw oil on the fire. So I think a lot of political parties now realize that uncertainty and fear are two big motivators for voters to choose a specific or a particular political party. So you can also see it in the campaigning. It's like, let's make America great again, referring to that now it's not great, it used to be great, so we have to go back to that days. And in the Brexit in England, when they left the European Union, it was let's take back control. So we used to have control, now not anymore. So it's referring to the past. So we're in a case we are walking toward the future, but not with our faces towards the future, but with our backs towards the future. So, and I think generative AI with all this misleading content can throw oil on the fire, because it's really easy to create evidence that something is the reality. So we have some kind of a blurred reality. So earlier I said we have a lack of a shared reality. That's a big problem. But I think generative AI makes this problem even bigger, because it's not only a lack of a shared reality, it's also a blurred reality. So we can't really figure out what's real and what's fake anymore. And if those two things are getting close together, then you have this blurred reality where anything goes. And everyone believes anything, or on the other side, no one believes anything anymore. So I think the problem with this generative AI and misleading content that you can create with it, it's not really that people believe anything, but they believe nothing. I think that's a greater risk for democracy So the focus is, when it comes to disinformation, it's really about people are going to believe this and that, and then it leads to polarization, etc. But I don't think they trust anything anymore, and that's a bigger problem for democracy as a whole.
Your own research focuses on the intersection of technology and the future of democracy. Given the rising influence of AI, do you think AI has genuinely impacted voter preferences across the world, including in Netherlands, or is the concern somewhat exaggerated?
Well, I think it obviously has a role. I mean, social media, the internet, generative AI, etc. It has some role in the shift towards a more populistic society. And you see in Europe, but also outside of Europe, you see a rise in more right populistic parties. That can't really be a coincidence, right? With the upbringing of generative AI, you see also a lean towards the right. But I do think this is a societal problem and not a technological problem. So it would be a bit naive to think that before generative AI, we were all friends and we were all getting along with each other, and we were, let's work towards solution. I mean, polarization is of all times. I mean, you can't really say that because of technology we are polarized, and because of technology we now have a more preference for right populistic political parties. But I do think the two can strengthen each other. So instead of pointing towards big tech, we should also think about big politics, because I think they are one of the greatest customers, maybe even for big tech. Because like I said earlier, politicians now realize that you can use this technology to mislead people. You can use the technology to spread fear, to spread uncertainty, and to make people believe that it used to be better. So it's really conservative. So it's not per se the fault of technology, but I do think that people with, well, false intentions can use this technology for their own benefit. And like with the inauguration of President Trump in the United States, you saw like all the big tech executives lined up at the first row. I mean, there is a connection there. But I do think at the same time that when there was no technology, we were also polarized. So the essence of polarization shifts, not polarization itself, but how we can address it. Because there was some research done in the Netherlands, and that quoted that there's a difference between the experience polarization and the actual polarization. So people feel more polarized and de facto are more polarized. But when you look at historical research from the past 35 years, you can see that the actual opinions of people haven't really changed that much. So the polarization, the actual polarization stays consistent, but the experience polarization is rising. So the gap between the two, that's, I think, the most important thing to look at. And believe it or not, I think you can also use technology to smaller the gap. So we talk about technology as a problem of polarization, but I believe technology is a design issue. So we can also design it differently. So if technology can polarize, then it can also connect. But we need to have an incentive to connect people. And now polarization is a business model. Companies earn a lot of money, and politicians create a lot of votes. And that needs to change.
I believe there will also a similar study on effective polarization, I think, and perceived polarization
Yeah.
in the US, where people thought that the other party, the people belonging to other party were evil. But when you actually came to talk about policy issue, their stance were somewhat moderate and they could find middle ground, agree with.
Exactly.
But then you see the election result, and it does feel polarizing. I mean, like, it feels like the society has chosen a sort of like an extreme path.
Yeah.
But not my place to give opinion. It's for an expert to tell.
Oh, no, it's a discussion, so please.
You developed technology Giswiser for parliamentary elections. Could you explain what it is and share some key findings from your research?
Yeah. So in the Netherlands, we have a lot of electoral compasses. So those are websites, voting tools which you can use when you want to orientate on which political party you should vote. And they are pretty big in the Netherlands. So almost everyone, so we have like 11 million people who are eligible to vote, and around 8 million people use this one particular voting tool. But there were like 30 different questions, but none of them was about digital technology. While it's a mega important subject, obviously, not only when we talk about the voting process and the role of AI, but also when it comes to education, healthcare, etc. Technology is everywhere. So if you want to look what party you should vote for, people have no idea what political parties think about digital technology. So about privacy, about fake news, about generative AI, about AI in education, about the power of big tech. So I decided to create our own voting tool. It's called the Technologie Kieswijzer. So it's a technology voting compass. And you got 18 different questions. And instead of a binary setup, so normally it's like agree or disagree, we gave 5 possible solutions which you could choose from. So for example, how should we combat disinformation, or who is responsible for the spread of disinformation? You could say, well, it's the responsibility of the government. They should have regulations. It could be the responsibility of the platforms, the big tech platforms. You could say it's a responsibility of the citizens because they have to inform themselves. You could say it's not even a problem. I mean, there are different flavors, but normal voting compasses, they like have this question, we should do more to address disinformation, agree or disagree. Yeah, well, everyone agrees. But the question is not if you want to address it, but how you should address it. And then when you look at the results, it's interesting to see that people are more nuanced in their answer solutions when they have more options. So when you have a binary question, people are leaning towards no or disagree. But when you have more options, people are more or less open to alternatives. So that was an interesting thing. And the other thing is that I got a lot of emails of people who are disappointed after they used the tool because they said, that's the wrong political party that came out of the tool. I normally vote for a right party, and now a left party should be my preference. This thing is wrong. It's not working. And I was like, yeah, but political parties gave their answers themselves. I mean, I didn't choose for them. But I think this shows that digital technology or digitalization is still in its early stage. So a lot of political parties don't really have like this constructive vision on new technology. So it is pretty much possible that some party is against facial recognition, but at the same time want to push technology in education. So it's not consistent. And I also think that digital technology, when you compare it to sustainability, for example, you have this in your gut feeling, okay, this is a left statement and this is a right statement. But with technology, what's a left point of view when it comes to technology, or what is a right point of view when you look at technology? So I think we still need a few more years that political parties have like a concrete vision on technology, and then they could also address this to their voters, and voters are also really helped by it.
Many experts argue that democracy is in crisis, warning that it may not survive the digital age. Fake news threatens electoral integrity, and political disengagement among youth is on rise. Yet, in your book, Alive and Clicking, you express hope for democracy. What fuels your optimism in an era dominated by fear and uncertainty?
I think there are 2 major things that I'm hopeful. First of all is young people. So they are way more critical when it comes to information technology than we believe to think. So most of the times, young people are pictured as like this vulnerable, young people who are victims of disinformation. But when you look at science, then a lot of research shows that, for example, during the presidential elections in the United States, that people over 65, they spread 7 times as much disinformation as the younger people. So it makes me hopeful that I think that a lot of young people actually understand the way the technology works. They're not that naive. They don't just think that everything on the internet is real. I think most older people believe that. I heard someone said, why do you think this is true? Well, it was on Facebook. I mean, a 20-year-old would never say that. I mean, they probably won't use Facebook, but they understand, okay, this is also a form of entertainment. It's not all the information is right. And we had for example, a designer in the Netherlands. She designed a scarf, and when you use this over your head, you couldn't be recognized by facial recognition. So I think that's really innovative, and they are already combating this mass surveillance, and that makes me very hopeful. And on the other side, like I stated earlier, technology is a design question. So if we can use it to polarize, we can also use it to connect. So for example, in Taiwan, they have this virtual participation process. So citizens can actually engage in making new policy, and they use an AI-driven conversation tool. It's called Polis. And instead of showing the most dominant points of views, normal social media does this, and it makes a small group really vocal because they think they all agree. But it searches for common interest between different groups. So the algorithm does 2 things. It divides people in different groups, not based on age or background, etc., but based on points of view. And then it searches for common points of view. So instead of the polarizing topics and points of view, they have no common interest, so they will disappear, but only the things that more people agree with. So for example, they use this technology to regulate Uber, the taxi, the challengers of the traditional taxis, and they found legislation together with all these stakeholders, and like more than 90% of all the different stakeholders agreed. So I think against the common perception that the objectivity almost of an algorithm can be used in topics where there's a lot of emotion. So for example, when you have a citizens assembly about climate change, and you make sure that farmers are there, but also climate activists. I think when you put them in the same room, they will get into a fight. At least they will argue very emotionally. But when you use this algorithm and you also invite farmers and climate activists without even knowing, they will probably agree on a lot of different topics where in a normal debate you wouldn't even see, it wouldn't even show. So I'm hopeful that if we use technology different, if we optimize it based on different standards, based on different values, so not to gain profit, but to actually develop public values, then we can make a big difference. We're not there yet. That's why I'm hopeful, not per se optimistic, because that's a different thing. An optimist would say it will all be fine. I don't think so. We have to work, and that's why hope is also an active form. Hoping means putting yourself out there and work towards a better future instead of an optimist who just lays back and says it will be all right. So that's why the subtitle of the book, Alive and Clicking, is There's Hope for Democracy, and not I'm optimistic about democracy. So that's a difference.
Finally, what are your recommendations or suggestions for various stakeholders involved in the electoral process, be it voters, political parties, electoral bodies, or the government?
I think an important thing is start from trust instead of distrust. So a lot of times when technology is used, also in the Netherlands, the government or other commercial organizations use technology based on the distrust in people. So, for example, we had this big scandal in the Netherlands, and they used an algorithm to detect fraud. But obviously, the algorithm was discriminating a lot of people because they said, okay, one of the aspects, one of the variables in the algorithm should be that people with a double nationality, they have a bigger chance of frauding, which is obviously discriminating. And when you use AI in a context like that, it blows in your face because the unjust society gets even bigger when you use AI. So the example I just gave about virtual Taiwan, when they also use technology in a participation process, they start not from distrust, but from trust in their citizens. So they are opening their doors and they are saying, talk with us, bring in ideas, think about better solution. And if you actually follow up these ideas and suggestions, then you can build a better trust relation. Then you can gain back some trust, because as a government, when you distrust your citizens, it couldn't be a big surprise that your citizens will also distrust you. So when you think about mass surveillance and all these different technologies, it's all based on distrust. So please use technology for empowerment instead of surveillance, and based on trust instead of distrust.
In India, there's digital divide, right? We have like billions of people, a lot of whom are not really aware of how to use technology, even the youngsters among them, because let's be honest, our education system is not the best at the moment or has not been for a long time, right? And so there are youngsters who would believe what they're seeing on Facebook, on Twitter, and etc. Right. And there are political, we have always had polarization. We had partition based on like religious lines, right? So it's not new. Artificial does like give a push to to these polarization, polarizing content, but it's always been an undercurrent in the Indian
Yes.
society. What my fear is that it is now the people who control technology, or the small minority who are on
Mm.
maybe on Twitter or who are on Facebook or social media platforms, even political parties who are hiring consultancy bodies like to manage their social media to generate AI content, or they have planted their own bots on social medias to ensure that one kind of message gets propagated more than other. And then my fear is that, and similarly, like you said that, you on the inauguration day of Trump, we had all these technocrats who were on the stage, and it's not a coincidence. So my fear it is that in a country like India, or even if you're in US, right, and you're
Mm.
using Twitter, Twitter is not reflecting, the algorithm is no more transparent, right? It is not reflecting what you believe in. It's no longer an echo chamber. It is shaping your psychology and feeding you content that might be polarizing. So my fear is that technology might drive the political discourse now, or those who know technology better would drive the political discourse, rather than people whose lives actually need to be shaped or reshaped, or touched upon to ensure that they are leading a better life. Rather than their voices being heard, it would be a small vocal minority who drives the political discourse. I mean, would it also make sense for Europe, or like is my fear sort of dumbfound, like it's not true?
No, it's a very legitimate fear, and I think um, we also have this problem in Europe. So we also have a digital divide, and I think the complex thing about this digital divide is that um, where there are some initiatives in the Netherlands that try to engage and empower people who have no access to technology or don't have the right skills to use technology, and they want to educate them, help them. And those are all very good initiatives, obviously, and it's very necessary. But I think we have to be careful that we think that access to technology is the same thing as closing the digital divide, because some research shows that by using technology, the digital divide only increases, because people who are really aware of the possibilities of new technology will always use it to enhance themselves. And I mean, it's not that the access of new technology automatically closes this digital divide. So it's in some ways a paradox, because new technology is also dividing, and not only when you look at the echo chambers, but also when it comes to access and skills. So yeah, what is the best solution? I mean, I don't have the answer. I think it's really complex, because but I think that or my suggestion would be, it's not the solution, but it's a way of looking towards it. We all talk about digital inclusion, so we need to include people in this digital society, but the approach is not about inclusion, it's about integration. So we want to integrate all the people in this digital society, which has some kind of perspective that it's good to have digital society, and we should have a digital society. So yes, you are welcome to, and you're welcome to. It sounds really inclusive, but it's just integrating and putting everyone in the making sure that all the people are based on the same norm. But you can't really do that, because that's unfair. So instead of digital integration, we really need to look at digital inclusion. And inclusion would also be people who don't want to use technology, or can't use technology, or have different reasons why technology is not for them. We should also listen to them, and we should also give them a voice. And I think that's what maybe, and hopefully that's what you mean by this, in this case, small focal group who has control, who built the technology, who create policy, etc. But this very large group of people who can't really come at the same pace, or at the same level, they lose their voices. And that's what I meant with this new technology. The digital divide can also get bigger. So we have to find a way that we can make this large group more vocal. But then we need a big cultural shift, probably, because the people at the top have to realize this. And then I'm not so optimistic. I'm still hopeful that we can work towards it. But I think we shouldn't educate all the people to live in the digital society. We should also educate policymakers and technocrats that technology isn't for everyone and isn't the holy grail. And there are also a lot of things that are not digital, or that are not technology, that can also be very beneficial. But now we live in this technocrat society, and I think that's the biggest problem. If you want to address the things you discussed, then we should also have a different perspective on the role of technology in society. And instead of seeing it as a solution, we have to see it as a means to an end. And we have to decide what is the end. And then we have to decide, is technology the right thing to use, or shouldn't we use it? For example, using algorithms in fraud detection, don't do it. Just, even if it's possible, just don't do it, because AI is statistics. And the statistics are not in your favor when you are part of a smaller statistic that already struggles in life. So it's complex. So but I think it starts with a different way of looking towards technology.
As a historian, I'm a little bit on the optimistic side, and I believe that once we have tasted democracy, you cannot just turn back the clock and suppress the voices of common people for all the time. I mean, there might be phases where there's polarization. I mean, we had the world wars, right? But then we tried to build consensus. But I'm not sure how that's going to happen at the moment. And
No.
it's a really tough time to be alive, to be young. And it's sort of, I feel a little fear. But thank you so much for joining us. And we are working on a report on influence of AI in Indian election. And I would be happy, once we're ready with that, I would be happy to share it with you and hear
Yeah.
your thoughts on it. Thank you so
That's
much
great.
for joining us today and for this very insightful and enlightening discussion. Thank you.